it was just at a point where the fear of not sleeping was just so powerful over an actual risk to my health. It just shows, where my mind was at with this intense fear. I knew myself and I knew this was anxiety, and for me, I think that the most difficult part was although I knew that it was anxiety that was driving it, it was this irrational fear, that it was the fact that I didn't know how to deal with it, and I never met anyone else that had it. So it was this very lonely feeling. And obviously, I think like everyone else in your channel, you go to the doctors and you get told to sniff lavender, or you turn your room temperature to a certain temperature at night. And that was all the doctor had to say about it. And, I was just thought I was the only one on the planet going through this. Letting your brain run and not focusing or giving power to it. And it's so easy to hear when you're in it and when you're struggling, to hear it, but not to really understand it. And that's so common and normal. But I think you have to go through so many setbacks to really internalize it and to really understand that you will always end up sleeping, no matter what, no matter how bad it feels. This will end with you sleeping, and it probably will end in you'll have another setback after that. It's just letting that process happen, and it's just part of the experience. You have to go through it as much as your brain needs until it realizes that nothing bad is going to happen. And I remember a thought that really helped me was, if I don't sleep tonight, if I have like a night where I'm not sleeping the way I want to sleep, would I rather go through that experience, worrying and adding a lot of extra anxiety on top, or would I rather go through that experience with just a sense of calm and relaxation? Because I know the next day I'm going to be struggling more from the emotional fatigue of struggling and stress than I will from just going, okay, that is how it's going to be, and I'd always choose the other option, so it's I think that was always something that really helped.
Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another really special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Flo with us. Welcome.
Hi Daniel.
So nice to have you. And for those who wondered, like, how did this come about? Well, actually, you sent me an email like a year and a half ago when you were in a really difficult place.
Yeah.
And then you sent me another email just a week or so ago where you said, things have changed so much for me. I would love to be able to share my story. Here we are. So with that said, tell us, how did you start having trouble sleeping?
So I think to understand the big one, I suppose, like you would coin it, which happened in October 2023, I actually had my first experience with insomnia when I was 17. And it was about a year of struggle. I was in a boarding school at the time, and I had a migraine. It was a really bad migraine that stopped me from sleeping one night, and it was during my A-level exams. And the next night I thought, oh, I need to sleep tonight because I didn't sleep at all like the night before. And as you do, it's always this one night that happens, and out of the blue, I just had this panic attack that came from nothing. I was just thinking, like, what if I don't sleep? And then boom, it hit me, and it was really intense. I'd never experienced fear like that before. It was I was throwing up, I was shaking, I couldn't understand this reaction my body was having. It was really overwhelming. And I think from that point, it was just this downward spiral of not knowing what was going on, this fear around bedtime. I'd be doing my teeth or I'd be eating my dinner. And these were all cues to kind of lead up to this big event where I would have this reaction, and I couldn't understand it. And for about maybe a month during that time when I was 17, I was maybe falling asleep around 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'd get like 2 or 3 hours, wake up at 7 for my alarm. And that was kind of my routine. And I would just be in fear for such a long time. And I never found anything like a channel during that period of that struggle. So I like to think I have enough kind of self-awareness to understand that this was an anxiety situation. This was obviously something that was causing this really intense reaction. So as I did loads of research. I was really focused on trying to figure out what was going on. And this was when I first read about anxiety and learning about the different kinds. And I was actually studying it in school, so, psychology. So we're looking at OCD, we're looking at phobias. And the word phobia seemed to resonate quite a lot with what was going on. I was like, oh, so maybe I've got a fear of not sleeping. I don't know why, I don't know where it came from, but it obviously causes this reaction in me. So from that point on, I sort of treated it like a phobia, and I just sort of became my own therapist, and I would be like trying to meditate every night, read self-help books to get through it. And my parents, they had to come because it was really difficult. I was taken out of school actually for a month because I couldn't focus on anything with this stress that was going on. And it was a long road. It was maybe around 8 or 9 months of slow recovery. I'd be in therapy, and for this thing that I just couldn't explain. And I was like, it's just a random phobia of sleep, whatever. And anyway, I came out of it, and I got used to the anxiety, and it faded away as the less attention I gave it. And to this day, I still think that was one of these things that I got through that I was really proud of. Like for a long time, I was like, this is the hardest thing I've had, and I don't know what happened, but I got through it. And that was, like I said, that was about a year until I was maybe 18 years old. And then between that point and October 2023, I had this kind of like a phase or timeline where I watched one of your videos, and the word truce, I think it was like a truce that I was in, where I'd come through this period, but there were these little setbacks, these little moments, that I would have certain experiences. I was traveling for a little bit, and the jet lag triggered like a week of the stress coming back, and then I got through it. And I almost had this idea of, you've been through it, so you're not going to go through it again. It's not going to happen again, no matter what happens. So I had this kind of idea ingrained in my mind that I'll never have this problem again because I got through it, which obviously, looking back, is probably not a very healthy way of looking at it, because there was a lot of pressure to live up to. But yeah, so that kind of led on to this event that was October 2023. What happened, I suppose, was, to understand maybe a bit of context, me and my partner, we were living together in like a house that was kind of next to my mum's house, to save a bit of rent before we were going to go traveling. And I live in Wales originally, so at the time it was in winter, it was very dark, kind of gloomy, there's not much going on. All of our friends were traveling at the time, so we really just had each other, and we were kind of locked in this little space. It was very rural, so there wasn't much to do, and I was working a very stressful job. So me and my partner, I relied on him a lot for a sense of safety and a sense of comfort during that period of time. And he actually was going to Bali, so he's a good surfer. So he wanted to go to Bali on a surf trip with his mates around October time for 2 months. And I was going to fly out with one of my close friends and a group of her friends that I'd never met, and we were going to go to Thailand for 2 weeks. And then after Thailand for 2 weeks, I was going to meet up with my partner in Bali, and then we would have 2 months in Sri Lanka and doing all this traveling. So it was a really exciting thing that we'd been looking forward to for a long time. And so I'm just waffling now, just going with the story. Yeah, so at that point, my partner left, and it would have been around 2 months then of not seeing him. And the night that he left, it was a similar thing from when I was 17. It was that first night, it just triggered some kind of really intense, fearful reaction. And I felt like almost a complete loss of control, like I was trying to hold it together. And the more I tried to do that, the more stressful it became and the more intense it was. I had a lot of panic attacks that night. And I think because I had this expectation of, you can't go back there, you can't have that horrible thing happen again. It was such a big weight that I had to protect myself from going through that, which obviously then caused the spiraling to happen. And that first week was really difficult. I think I was just sort of bouncing around my mum's house and my dad's house, trying to find a bedroom that I could sleep in, that I didn't have a scary experience in. And then as soon as I had a really bad night, I'd almost try and find another bedroom. I would be escaping the experience, and I'd be trying to find somewhere. And I was, it was a really difficult period of time. I was really stressed, and I was having a lot of all-nighters. That was a big part of my journey, is all-nighters. That was kind of the big fear. Or sleeping very little. And I think it must have been about a week after Max left, where the night before this thing happened, I had my first night where I slept. I was at my dad's, and I was like, oh, like finally I had a night that I've slept. This is like, maybe this is where it starts to get better. I've had a week of real horrible stress and trauma, and this is definitely as close as it's come to when I was 17. But I've, like, maybe this is all it is, thankfully. And I had a good night of sleep. And then this is just really bad timing. But the day after, I perforated my esophagus. Still don't know how that happened. It was just, I had a really sore throat, and then my chest became really painful. And I went to the doctors, and basically they ended up doing a CT scan, and air was leaking out of my throat into my chest cavity. And it was really freak thing that had just happened out of the blue, and it probably couldn't have been worse timing if I look back now. So I ended up spending 2 nights in hospital. And in that period of time, I think because of the stress of everything, I think it shows how fearful I was around sleep, because I didn't sleep once for the 2 nights I was there, not even an hour, because I was just so panicked. And the irony was I was facing this real risk to my life. It was a 48-hour time period if you do something like that, where it's really dangerous because you can get infection and it's a really intense thing. And despite the very real risk I was facing, the only thing I could think of is I'm going to die if I don't sleep a third night. I'm going to die. This was this was where my mind was at. And I remember the nurse, the night nurse, should be coming through, and every hour, bless her, she was just trying to do her job. Every hour I'd be like, you need to help me, I'm not going to survive. It's almost 2 nights of not sleeping. If I don't sleep tomorrow, like, the more I panic, the more I know it's not going to happen, but I can't stop the panic. It's not controllable. And it was just this really intense fear. And anyway, so that was that experience in the hospital. And it was just at a point where the fear of not sleeping was just so powerful over an actual risk to my health. It just shows where my mind was at with this intense fear. And the next night I got like what's the word when you leave hospital? I got
Discharge.
taken away, discharged. Yeah, discharged from hospital. And I remember that whole day coming home, I've never felt like that before. I felt so detached from reality. I was just so in such a state of fear and exhaustion, and looking at sort of maybe this had only been a week and a half since Max left, and it almost felt like this tiny period of time where my life had just been completely changed, and it was really, really intense. And even now looking back, it feels almost traumatic. And I think that night after hospital, I was like to my parents, like, I'm not going to sleep. I'm so panicked. There's just no way a third night. I'm just never going to sleep again. And so in that state of mind, my parents were obviously worried as well. They drove me back to A&E to get a sleeping pill or something, just to just knock me out almost, just for that first night, so that I could, in my dad's words, just have a night of just brain reset to deal with what had happened at the hospital. And went to the doctors. I was there until 2 a.m. because I was in A&E, and it was about a 7-hour wait just for for a sleeping tablet. And I got prescribed Xanax. And if you know me, my personality, I'm very I've always thought of myself as very self-aware. I was always like the therapist to other people. I have a very strong internal sense of awareness of what's going on in my emotions and things like that. And because when I was 17, I didn't take medication, I always held this thing for myself of like, oh, you never did it. Like, you never took medication. Like, it was this big moment for me. I did it all mentally through like a lot of mindfulness and work. So I think it added to the sense of shame when I was just at a place where I got given a Xanax, and I was really fearful of medication as well. So it was a really big deal for me. But anyway, I took the Xanax that night, and then on the drive home, I just remember feeling all my thoughts just fuzz away, and it was really weird. And I got home, I think I slept about 5 hours, and then I woke up, and I remember it all hitting me, and I was like, wow, this is where I'm at. This is where my life, this is where things are now. Anyway, so there's most of the story, I guess, is this first 2 months, and then there's about a year of just the journey, I suppose. But it's just this intense time, which was the thing. From that point on, I was on the Xanax for maybe about a week, but I hated it. I hated the thought of being on it. It really scared me. So I went to the doctors, and he then prescribed me Zopiclone, which I don't know if that's any better, to be honest, after doing research. But looking back, it's what I needed at the time, and I won't there's no anyone on medication, it's for a reason, and it's so important, and I completely understand. In that moment, it was what I needed. And but I was still so fearful of it. I'd be quartering it, every night. I'd be so scared to take it. I'd be trying to go a night without it, and then I'd have an all-nighter, and then the next night I would take it. So I was, for about a month, I would sleep every other night. So I'd have every other night was an all-nighter. And the nights that I did sleep were when I'd take a half of Zopiclone or a quarter of Zopiclone. I'd maybe get around 4 or 5 hours. So that was me for about a month. And bear in mind, this whole time I was in kind of fight or flight, really intense survival mode. I lost loads of weight. I couldn't eat. I was just in this place of disbelief really at where I was with everything, and I was just couldn't see a way through. It was quite dark, and it was a really, really difficult time. And I think it was in this month where I emailed you that
Yeah.
first email.
Yeah.
I think it must have probably been like 3 in the morning, and I found your channel that month of being home. I think after maybe a week or two of being on the Zopiclone, and I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. There's this channel, like it was through Reddit, like I mentioned to you, it's through Reddit. I was Googling, and maybe I should mention actually during the hospital, I think the thing that caused my anxiety to spiral even more was when I was Googling, because I needed an answer to why this was happening. I needed some control. So I was Googling like all these things, and I shouldn't have done it, but I saw this page of it was like the stages of sleep deprivation, first night, second night, third night. That's kind of what caused this. Oh, if I get onto the third night, it was this intense fear of like there was nothing I could do to stop myself from going through these stages. And it was in my mind a lot of the time, and worrying about psychosis and I was going to die, and my brain, my vision, all of all of this stuff was so. Looking back, I can laugh about it, but in the moment, it was really scary. But yeah, so it was at
Well,
that point I emailed you.
I wanted to just sneak in a question for, which was
Mhm.
during this month, um, were you still working or did you take a break from work?
No, so it was either that first week. I can't remember now. It was either that first week or a few days after the hospital where I quit. It got to a point actually where because I did a lot of remote work. I was a graphic designer, and my boss, I was literally on a webcam. I was just crying. I couldn't. I couldn't deal with it. And I think for me, the way I dealt with it a lot of the time was I would talk about it to anyone and everyone that could listen, because I was just hoping for some form of understanding, or like someone else would be like, oh yeah, I struggle with sleep sometimes, or that was the best thing I could hear, is if someone else said that they struggled with sleep. So I would always talk about it, and I was very open with my boss. But then it did get to a point where I was like, I can't work anymore,
Yeah.
And luckily, I had saved up enough at that point. I'd been working the whole year, and I had this holiday coming up, which I was saving for. So it was in technically the right time frame for me to be able to quit, And
Yeah. And then
yeah, so
because you weren't working then, were your
mhm,
days very much consumed with like problem solving and Googling and researching or?
100%, 100%. It was all I could think of, and it was in that, like I say, I call it that crisis period, of just I remember I was staying with my dad at the time during that month and a half before Thailand, and I was talking every second of every day. I would ask him, "Am I going to be okay? Am I going to get through this?" Because he'd be planning something on Wednesday and it would be Sunday, and I would think like, "Dad, I'm not going. I can't imagine getting there. I don't know how I'm going to get to that day. I can't see how that's going to happen if I can't sleep. I'm not going to make it." And I think to that point, I was just yeah. So it was very much touch and go that period of time. Yeah. So looking back, it was kind of crazy, and I was obviously very consumed by it, and like you
Yeah,
said, I was always thinking about it. It was always on my mind. Yeah.
I hear. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then you found
Yeah.
the channel,
Yes.
and did you immediately feel like, okay, what they're talking about here makes sense to me, or did it feel like I don't know if this is if this is going to be helpful for me?
No, straight away, I was immediately, because like I said, I knew myself, and I knew this was anxiety, and I just for me, I think that the most difficult part was I'd never, although I knew that it was anxiety that was driving it. It was this irrational fear, that it was the fact that I didn't know how to deal with it, and I never met anyone else that had it. So it was this very lonely feeling. And obviously, I think like everyone else in your channel, you go to the doctors and you get told to sniff lavender, or you turn your room temperature to a certain temperature at night, and that was all the doctor had to say about it. And I was just thought I was the only one on the planet going through this. So really, when I found your channel, it just reaffirmed the things that I'd gone through when I was 17 and what I was going through now, but also that the people that are going through this, and it was just I just absorbed. I spent hours every day going through your channel, because it was the only thing at that time that I had, and it was a very powerful thing. So that's what drove me to do this, to be honest, because I remember thinking to myself when I was at my worst, I'd be like watching the recovery videos, and at that point, I was thinking, I'm not going to make it. But I was like, if I do, the best thing I can think of would be to to just do this and be able to do this when I come out of it. And so it's kind of surreal to be
Yeah,
here
yeah.
today, but and looking back at how crazy your mind can make something that actually isn't a big deal once you come out of it. But yeah, so it's
Yeah,
crazy
sorry,
story
I,
that.
I I jumped in and asked you some questions, but
Yeah,
but
yeah,
thanks for
of
answering
course.
that. But basically, yeah, take us from, so you sent me the email, and I think
Hmm.
you're about to go on this trip, and yeah, what happens
Yeah.
next?
Yeah, so I sent the email, and I think just from that period, I'd found your channel, I was binging your channel. I think at that point, to be completely honest, it didn't help the situation, only because I think I was just in such a point that although the information is like, this is what I need to do, or this is it, I wasn't at a point where I could internalize anything, because the fear of having another all-nighter, or just this, that a lot of your channel is about facing that fear in a very kind way to yourself. And what I needed to face was, after that all-nighter, not taking the medication, it would be not taking the medication for a second night, and just going through that second night. That was something I knew I needed to do, but I was just at a place where I couldn't physically even. I'd maybe try for an hour or two on that second night, every other night, and then I'd be panicking and freaking out, and then I would, so I didn't have the courage basically at that point. And I knew that something had to change. I couldn't live my life like this, so it was the courage that I didn't have. But your channel, I knew that it was going to help me in other ways as my journey progressed, and as I kind of did get that courage eventually, it was obviously what ended up being the thing that got me out of it. So yeah, this is maybe a month of just, like I say, crisis and fight or flight, not being able to eat or sleep at all or anything. And I told my partner about this in Bali, and he felt pretty helpless, because he was obviously on the other side of the world. And it was kind of triggered by his leaving, so it was almost that sense of safety was gone, and it was that automatic response to that. Anyway, so I also had this pressure about Thailand coming up, and I needed to be better by Thailand. But I knew that I was in such a point that I knew from it feeling almost worse than when I was 17, and it took a year. So in my mind, I was thinking, like, I'm not going to get out of this, or it's going to take years. Like, I was at a mental point now, or I just knew it wasn't going to go after a month before Thailand. So, but the only thing I could imagine that would have been worse than that was staying where I was and nothing changing, because I couldn't imagine doing what I was doing every day. So I was like, anything to change would be good. So I went to Thailand, and I ended up backpacking around Thailand with these girls that, bless them, they were, really wanting that backpacker experience, staying in hostels. So we did that, and I was just in a really, really bad place. And I was, in Thailand, and I remember thinking, like, I can't believe it. Like, this is my life. Like, I'm here, and all I can think about is sleep. And these poor girls have heard enough about me talking about sleep, and my best friend, who I went with, who knew these other girls, she, obviously we were staying in different places, she'd always be in the same room as me. She would be there for me the whole way through, comforting me. And every hour of the night, I would be asked, I'd hear her move in bed, and I'd think, oh, she's awake, that means I can talk to her and I can ask her if I'm going to be okay. And this was a routine we had, and bless her, she just listened to me the whole time, and she was there for me. And so I really appreciated that, actually. So shout out to,
Yeah,
to
exactly. I
her
was
if she
thinking the
watches
same. Shout out to your
this.
friend. If you want to mention her
Yeah.
name, feel free to do so, but you know who you
Catherine.
are.
Yeah, you know who you are. Yeah, so it was just this kind of period of time. It was very touch and go still. I was very much in I call it the crisis period, or in the fight or flight period of just being really fearful. And I had the Zopiclone with me. I was worrying about how I was going to get it through customs, because I didn't know if it was something I could take. And there was this fear about, what if I don't have it with me? Um, and looking at the box whenever I took it would make me really anxious, because I would just be so scared of the whole thing. And it was, so for maybe until I saw Max again, so that was 2 weeks after Thailand, that from the day when I started taking Zopiclone, a month and a half before, and then the 2 weeks after Thailand, was every other night I was sleeping. But the night in between, I'd have 0 hours, and the nights I would sleep on the Zopiclone, it was maybe about 5 hours. So, but what's weird looking back, I don't remember being tired. I don't remember being exhausted. I don't remember having any sleep-based symptoms whatsoever. I remember being terrified. And, that's part of maybe what I'll come back to and talk about, like, what I learned. But, it was really interesting, that whole period of time. Anyway, so moving on from that, I went to Bali to see my partner. And to be honest, I'd say from that point on was where the journey began of leaving the intense struggle and entering into kind of this 1.5 year long journey. Um, I then traveled from around Bali and Sri Lanka with my partner, and he was very aware of what happened when I was 17, and he was aware of everything I was going through. And for the first time, I felt this sense of safety back in my life. It felt like he'd offered this safe space for me to try not taking medication, after an all-nighter. And it was this kind of this sense of like, okay, even if the worst happens, I don't sleep again, he's there. Like I'm not completely by myself. And that was what I needed. It was this real sense of safety for me. And bit by bit, in those 2 months around Bali and Sri Lanka, I started having my first night where I remember it being a milestone, actually, the first night where I slept by myself without medication for 2 hours. It was just 2 hours, but I woke up and I was like, oh, I remember a dream. I remember, like I wasn't so panicked, that I actually remember sleeping. And for those 2 months of traveling, I started incrementally sleeping a little bit more just throughout that period of time. I maybe got I maybe would then sleep around 2, 3 in the morning, or maybe 1 in the morning, maybe getting around roughly 2 to 5 hours of sleep without medication. And I gradually stopped taking it and started sort of having that courage to go through these nights without needing to have the medication. Got to the point maybe at the end of the traveling where I was kind of sleeping, not normally, but like falling asleep 1, 2 in the morning, or having very like a separated sleep, and I kind of classically was like, oh, this is, I'm through it. Little did I know that was like a year of a journey, should I say, when I got home, because the reality of being back where everything happened. And I was with all my friends came out that were from Wales. They all came to traveling as well. So we were just all together, and it was just, it's almost this dream of feeling swept up, that I wasn't thinking about sleep. And I'd still be listening to a channel kind of when I had little moments. I'd be in a tuk-tuk in Sri Lanka, and I'd just be listening to you on my phone, like listening to something. And but it was sort of less and less as I was being more distracted. But anyway, I came home, and that was when things really, I won't say that obviously the whole year this was just the crisis period, but for the year it was just everything you can think of experiencing, the ups, the downs, the process was all, it was all part of it. And a big thing for me was hyperawareness, because I think potentially, this is self-diagnosed, but I have had issues with it before. I think I've got sensory motor OCD. So I've had certain issues where I've worried about things that are supposed to be natural processes in the body, that you kind of overthink and worry about. So for example, this may sound a little bit silly, but during this year of recovery, I'd experienced this little speed bump almost, where it was, I'd worry, I was crying at a movie because it was really beautiful, and I was in a really emotional moment with this movie. And I suddenly remember thinking like, oh, like you're crying. Like I noticed myself crying and being swept up in this emotion. And then I thought, what if being aware of me, because as soon as I brought awareness to me being upset, in a nice way, in a cathartic way, it took me out of the moment, and I stopped being able to appreciate the natural flow of emotion. And I stopped feeling that. And then I was like, oh my God, I did that. I caused this and then I had this fear for maybe a few weeks or a month of what if every time I witness something beautiful, or I want to experience emotion, or I want to write poetry because I love writing poetry, I just can't get the emotion, the natural flow, because I'll be aware of it, and then that awareness will stop me. And I was like, there's something here that I have this weakness, when it comes to things that are supposed to be natural. The fear that I'm automatically going to stop that natural process is, that's something that I struggle with, and I wouldn't say that I'm going to label myself, but it's just a little, it's a flaw that I have. It's a thing that I struggled with in various ways, intrusive thoughts. Sometimes I have never got really bad, but because I was able to nip them in the bud and be like, it's just a thought, it's okay. But I had a tendency to have this. And I think I was learning a lot about this in this year of setbacks and this hyper awareness, as I was mentioning. That was a big part, because it was this awareness of an automatic process right before you fall asleep. And so that was kind of the year, was just this journey.
Yeah. Wow, thanks for sharing it. And when you were talking about how you were kind of overcome with emotion, watching a movie and started crying, you became aware of that, and that took you out of the. It reminded me of something I've heard a few times, which is somebody who's asked me about yawning, who said I was about to yawn and then I became aware of it, and I couldn't yawn, and have I lost the ability to yawn? It's very, very similar, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's just something that should be natural, and your awareness stops it. But I think a lot of the time, and this is the case for a lot of OCD and even the sleep thing, is everyone experiences that sense of awareness. It's just an automatic thing, falling asleep. I asked my partner, he has hypnic jerks all the time, and I think, did you notice you just did that? And he was like, yeah, but I thought about it, and then I want to sleep like 10 minutes later, and it's like, it's such a normal part of experiencing life, is being aware of your inner state. But the only difference between someone that maybe has OCD, again, this is not diagnosed, it's just my experience, but the only difference between someone that has maybe experienced OCD versus someone that doesn't is the fear that gets brought along to that awareness. It's that focus on that thing, and what it means for you as a person, I think. So yeah, it was a year of really learning a lot, going through so many speed bumps. There was a lot of people on your channel. That was actually when I started watching the recovery videos, because when I was during that period of time that was really stressful, I couldn't watch recovery videos because I couldn't hear anyone else talking about their difficulties, because it triggered me too much, and at this point I was ready to do that. I was ready to watch people, and that really did help. I was like, why didn't I do this earlier? Because now I'm listening to people, and I was like, okay, this is really useful. And Nina was a big part of that for me, listening to Nina. And Elena was, when I found her channel, I ended up following Fearless Sleep, and that was a big part of my recovery as well. So shout out to Elena as well. Yeah, so it was just, for me, like I had mentioned briefly, all-nighters were this thing that I experienced a lot. And for a long time, I thought, I'm not going to heal from this fully, because a lot of people on your channel, they didn't struggle with all-nighters the way I struggled. In my mind, this is what I was telling myself, people would be worrying about not sleeping, falling asleep fast enough, or having sort of intermittent sleep. And here I am going days without sleeping. Like, my case must be different, the classic, like my situation is different. And I'm here, like, every other night not being able to sleep, or just going periods where I couldn't at all. And Elena's story was really helpful, because obviously she experienced that a lot, and she mentioned that she had a lot of all-nighters, and that was a big part for me. And just learning that, no, you're not different, you're not special. You're like every other person that goes through the fear of this. Yeah, so that year was just really a lesson, and I'd have some really intense setbacks where I felt like I was right back to the beginning. Max was with me the whole time. We were back in Pembrokeshire living together at this point again, and then I'd have periods of time where I'd sleep completely normal, and I'd sleep 8-9 hours for a few weeks, thinking I was completely out of it. And then I'd think, oh, so that's why I did it. Okay, it's because I wasn't thinking. I just wasn't thinking. So next time, you just don't think of anything in your sleep. It's that classic. It's every trap, every pitfall I went into, and I learned, and I crawled out of it again. And yeah, so I think now I'm at a place where it's a year and a half later. I'd say the last 3 or 4 months, there is barely any fear. I've actually moved to Australia with my partner so it's maybe before Australia that I think I entered this period. So about the last 6 months, I'd say, have just been sort of it being in the background of my life. It's being a small voice, not focused. I sleep like a baby, pretty much. I have done for like 6-7 months, given the odd speed back in between. But yeah, we moved to Australia, and now we're here working and having a great time. And I still get setbacks, but like, for example, a month ago, I had this maybe 2-week setback where I had another new thing to focus on that I hadn't had before. So my brain was like, what if this is this is the thing? And I won't say maybe what it is, because I don't want to. I hate the idea of triggering someone else and then they have this symptom, or I don't know. But for me, I had this thing, and I couldn't stop focusing on it. And then for 2 weeks, I was in this pendulum cycle of not sleeping at all, and then sleeping, not sleeping at all, and sleeping. And it got to a point where I just got bored of it, and I was like, oh, like, okay, this is what I'm in now. Like, like I'm going to work. I was working a hospitality job that started at 7 in the morning, and I managed to do all these shifts, with 0 sleep, or maybe 2 hours sometimes in the morning on these off days. And I just got to a point where I was like looking back and thinking, this was my worst nightmare, and this caused so much fear for me a year and a half ago. But here I am, like, just going through these nights. Yeah, they suck and they're not fun, and you don't enjoy it, and especially the next morning after an all-nighter, you feel really rough. But it was no more rough than you having a cold or something. And I just thought, this is it. Like, I don't care. And then I ended up sleeping after 2 weeks. It just faded away. So yeah, I think that's where I'm at. And yeah, that's the
No,
story.
no, that's wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing all this. So helpful. And it reminded me of something you said earlier, which was during your time in Thailand when you were really in
Mhm,
this like crisis mode, like really frazzled. You had you sort of, I guess, looking back, had made the
mhm,
same realization that your days were
mm,
you were not like falling asleep during the day or like completely exhausted. It was more kind of
mhm,
the fear dominated your day rather than like sleep
mm.
deprivation symptoms. Was that something like that? Was it a realization you had?
Yeah, it was. I think, and even I've had this all through the last year and a half. If I had like a night with zero sleep, a week later, I don't remember the experience of the tiredness or the exhaustion. I mean, sure, it's there and it's not nice to feel tired, but everyone has that. And I think the realization more was for me, it was the story I told myself around that experience. And like your channel says, it was the fear. The fear was always the problem, and I was never in danger. And I think what my brain still sometimes struggles with is because that first few months was so traumatic, my brain can't understand that I was safe, because how could I have been safe if that those feelings existed? And I think that's why I still get setbacks, or I still have these little moments where after a month of sleeping well, my brain kind of questions it. It's a bit suspicious, because it's like, how could you have gone through that thing and have been safe the whole time and you didn't even know it? So yeah, it was definitely a big realization for me that I was safe, and the exhaustion wasn't a big issue. It was the lack of sleep wasn't really a problem, and you will sleep again. Like you just will 100%. It's just it's letting go and removing yourself from the process, and letting the process happen the way it happens, letting it be automatic, and just watching it and knowing that you're not permanently going to damage or irreversibly cause any kind of problem towards something that is so ingrained in our DNA and our ability to survive. You think back to caveman times. I'm sure they must have had so many nights of fear and hunting, and nights where they didn't sleep, and it was just part of life. And you're built to withstand it. It's completely
Yeah,
normal.
yeah. No, you bring up
Mm,
something I think a lot about is like
mm,
fear is literally there for our protection. Like fear is there
mhm.
to keep us safe. But again, our mind is so resourceful and
Yeah,
it can come up with so many ideas that it can literally be afraid of
yeah,
feeling afraid, right? And that's so
yeah,
often what drives the
exactly,
struggle after a while. It's like the fear of fear.
for
Um,
sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting kind of looking back, and for me the big word here that caused a lot of this was control, and it was the need to control something natural, and the fear that there was nothing I could do to stop something bad from happening. And so that innately caused this reaction of, I need to solve this so that I can stop this bad thing from happening, because if I remove myself from it, it's going to happen. And the irony there is that it's the complete opposite is true. The thing that feels the most unsafe is the thing that takes you out of the struggle, and the removal of yourself from the situation, and just allowing your body and trusting in your body to restore that. My partner actually said something interesting when I went through my last setback, and he was like, your body always wants to find regulation. It always wants to return to that point. And the less work you do around trying to make that happen, the more accurately it's going to happen, or the more quickly and effectively it's going to happen. And I think that's something huge I've learned is it feels really uncomfortable when you're having a lot of thoughts and you're struggling with a lot of stuff. Um, it feels unsafe to remove yourself from your mind, because it should, if it's a safety mechanism, it's trying to make you focus on it. But in a situation when you do that, that's the way forward. It's just not trusting your thoughts and just taking everything your brain thinks in those moments with a pinch of salt. And over time you start to learn to just notice them and accept them for what is, which is that they aren't really, they're just neurons firing. You get like there's like 75,000 thoughts a day or something crazy like that, and we choose the handful that make us really really scared. And but there's no difference from that between that and the thought that makes you laugh. And I think just really, this sounds really silly, but I used to do this a lot, especially when I was 17. I'd think when I had a really scary thought, like, oh, what if I don't sleep? I'd make my brain think of the most random thing, like a giraffe jumping through my window, something like that. It was always that for some reason. And I remember like trying to weigh them up equally and going, right, there is no difference between these two things. It's just because I put attention and power on one of them. Um, and I started really focusing on that. This whole year was a lesson on thoughts, and really just letting your brain run and not focusing or giving power to it. And it's so easy to hear when you're in it and when you're struggling, to hear it but not to really understand it, and that's so common and normal. But I think you have to go through so many setbacks to really internalize it and to really understand that you will always end up sleeping no matter what, no matter how bad it feels. This will end with you sleeping, and it probably will end in another, you'll have another setback after that. It's just letting that process happen, and it's just part of the experience. You have to go through it as much as your brain needs until it realizes that nothing bad is going to happen. And it's interesting, befriending wakefulness, that idea for me was, I couldn't, even when I felt better, I couldn't watch TV or do something that didn't feel I couldn't get myself out of bed because it felt too unnatural. For me, befriending wakefulness was just giving myself permission to rest and to lie there and not force myself to sleep. And I remember a thought that really helped me was, if I don't sleep tonight, if I have like a night where I'm not sleeping the way I want to sleep, would I rather go through that experience, worrying and adding a lot of extra anxiety on top, or would I rather go through that experience with just a sense of calm and relaxation? Because I know the next day I'm going to be struggling more from the emotional fatigue of struggling and stress than I will from just going, okay, that is how it's going to be, like, and I'd always choose the other option, so it's I think that was always something that really helped when I was going through
Yeah,
that sort
that's a great nugget for everybody who's tuning in here. And hi, it's me, Daniel. And you're probably wondering, what are you doing here, Daniel? Well, the thing is that just after we wrapped up this interview with Flo, she emailed me. In fact, it was the day after. She emailed me and said, hey, Daniel, I forgot something I really wanted to say. And when I read the email, I was like, wow, this is so nice. I really want to share this. And I asked her if it was okay for me to just read her email towards the end of the interview. And she said, yes. So let's do that. And by the way, it's very wise that you stayed towards the end, because this, I think, is a real nugget here from Flo. So yes, the day after the interview, Flo wrote, hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me on your channel and allowing me to tell my story. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, so it feels like such a full circle moment. After the call, I thought of something I forgot to mention, which I'm sure happens to all your guests. But one thing that I noticed when struggling was that the thought that if this is fixed, I could return back to how things used to be, then I would be eternally happy forever and never feel sad or ungrateful again. If I could just get over this one thing, then I'd have all I ever wanted. However, the irony is, once you do get through it, life goes on in the most mundane and anticlimactic way. Once you leave insomnia, things aren't eternally happy, and you just become the regular person you were before it all happened, with happiness, sadness, fear, gratitude, all still existing as part of your experience. And I feel like that sums up recovery for me. Once I decided to start living in spite of what was going on, that is, still going to work and doing your best after all-nighters, showing up to see your friends regardless of your situation, allowing yourself to think about and enjoy other things aside from sleep, etc., that was so powerful to me. In reality, healing is a quiet, gentle process. When you truly leave the fear and understand the truth of it all, there are no confetti bombs or parades or this sense of eternal happiness. Life just goes on and becomes more important and engaging than your insomnia, especially once you realize that you are always truly safe. After all is said and done, you come away with more knowledge, appreciation, and self-kindness than you started with. And I feel like this is the most beautiful realization of this journey for me. I wish I'd remembered to mention it, but hey ho, I suppose it would be impossible to squeeze a whole year and a half of this crazy journey and all its realizations into one video. But regardless, again, thank you for everything, and I wish you all the best with your channel for future. I'd definitely be, and already have been, recommending to anyone who has mentioned to me they've struggled with sleep. All the best, Flo. And so, yes, I really want to share these words of wisdom with you, because they can keep you from what we call the post-insomnia blues, when like the struggle fades and we're like, but I feel kind of sad, like something is missing. And I thought I was going to be really happy. Well, no doubt there are going to be like these life lessons that are going to make life more interesting and meaningful and enriching. But there's no confetti. It's like somebody else said, insomnia kind of sneaks out the back door. And knowing that can help, because then we don't have this kind of sense of disappointment. Like, I thought I was going to be happy forever. So anyways, just some really wise words from Flo there. And now back to the final part of the interview. Bye. Yeah, I want to ask you 2 more questions, and you probably know which questions I was asking then. But one of them is, you touched on this, but I want to ask you if there are things that you learned going through this struggle with sleep that have been helpful in other areas of life.
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of other areas, actually a few things. The first thing is a massive part of why the second big one happened was because I had this fear of pressure of not experiencing something that I'd already been through. I was like, once I've been through it, I can't go through it again. This kind of, I've already learned the lesson. So why is, you know, going forward, I'm never going to put that expectation on myself. I'm never going to, well, I will try my hardest not to have this huge pressure to do everything right once I've been through it. Yeah, there might be a circumstance in 20 years or 15 years or something where this triggers a little bit more sleep anxiety, and I think hopefully I know enough now because of your channel. Genuinely, it's because of your channel that I have the education and the resources to realize, which I didn't have the first time, to realize that this isn't dangerous and to understand all these things I've gone through. It's yeah, that was a big part. It's just not putting that pressure and that expectation on yourself that once you're better, you have to be better forever, because that's not how life works, and it's not the way that things go. And the second thing for me was learning that, like we were just talking about, thought and what your brain says and what your mind is telling you when you're not feeling safe is so unreliable. And of course it feels uncomfortable to remove yourself from that, because that's part of it, feeling unsafe. It's trying to warn you from something. But for me, it was just over time learning in other areas of life, like I go through various stresses and things. It's now I'm able to sort of take what my brain says with a pinch of salt and not trust my thoughts so much, use them as a tool rather than this be all end all advice that that it's giving. So that's been a huge change for me, learning to let go.
Yeah, that's big. Very, very nice to hear that. And finally, if you could travel back in time to either when you were 17 or maybe in 2023 when you were going through this difficult patch, what will you tell yourself?
I think for me, what I wanted to hear back then would have been a future version of myself saying, you're going to get through it. So I think that's what I would have told myself. Is I fly back to that person and I would say, like, this is completely okay. What you're going through is going to end. It always will. To anyone out there, it will get better. It will get better faster if you don't fight this process. And your channel, you use the channel and you use the resources you've got, and it will help having that way of thinking. But no matter what, your brain is designed to go through these things and to self-regulate and to understand as you go. So you will go through it, you will sleep again, and you'll come out the other side, and maybe you'll do a recovery video later down the line. Yeah, that's what I would tell myself. And just to say thank you as well to you, because it was without, you were like a lifeline to me. So and I'm sure for so many people it feels almost selfless what you do on your channel. So I think it's very appreciated. So yeah, thank you.
Anytime. So glad to hear that. And by the way, like, you being a guest here, it's like positive, that it's that flywheel of like somebody hearing this now finds hope and inspiration, and then they help other people, and it's a beautiful thing. But Flo, thanks so much for being a guest here, and just be in touch.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Hi, it's me, Coach Daniel, and I hope that you found a ton of value in the video that you just saw. Now, if somebody would ask me, hey, Daniel, what do you think would really help somebody who has tuned in to a lot of the videos, who understands a lot, but who's just not seeing things change for them? I would say contextualization, discourse, to talk to somebody who understands what you've been going through, that you can ask questions to, get a reply, ask a follow-up question, get another reply, etc. That conversation so often starts to clarify things and really kickstarts your journey towards peaceful sleep. And one way you can have such a conversation is by booking a call with one of our coaches. In fact, you can head over to our website, thesleepcodeschool.com, and you can see which coaches offer calls and check out their individual success story to see if their story relates with you, and you find that connection that leads you to see that this is a person that I could work with. This is a person I would talk to. And then you can book a call, and that could be what really kickstarts your journey to where you want to be.